So I showed up today because I helped organize this event, and it's the vision of bringing leadership together, leadership in all its forms, and convening people around the theme of our calling to do the leadership work that needs to happen in all the places that we work. On a personal level, it has to do, and I spoke about this earlier, has to do with the way we are towards ourselves and each other. So I like to frame that as, instead of thinking of leadership as political, is leadership as an ethical commitment. And so what it means to me inside out is how I am, for example, as a father. What role does that play? I have two children, and how does that become a transformative space, a space of possibility, a space to rehumanize given our histories? But then as we see ourselves outward, I'm also a profe and an incoming director to a program. So how can the leadership and the kinds of values of justice that I envision for myself in relationship to others be manifest in, say, the design of programs? And how can those programs carry forth that vision? And even then into the bigger society is, how is it that me as a father, me as somebody who's a director, becoming a director of a program, how that can also lead to social change on a more macro scale? How can it contribute to the regional efforts that need to happen here in the IE?
Social justice leadership, what it means to me personally is reflecting on my own biases and deconstructing all of the myths we've been taught in education as we've grown up, and kind of reimagining how we can transform education in ways that are meaningful for communities, and focusing on specifically the growth of communities in general. There are many ways, unfortunately, that the education system today continues to hinder the progress, growth, development of historically marginalized communities. I think specifically in the Inland Empire, we have issues regarding, neglecting climate change and not recognizing the impact of the continuous development of factories all over the Inland Empire, and what that's doing for our health and the general health of the population in the Inland Empire, particularly. Continuing cultural erasure of people of color, specifically Black, Indigenous, and people of color, in a multitude of ways, from standardized testing to continuous, erasure in curriculum, right? And so we need to work against these narratives and dominant narratives that exist in education to kind of revitalize our communities and recognize that we are going to free us. We are the only ones to free us. And so there's lots of different methods that we could do that. One of them being ethnic studies. Ethnic studies in the schools is really significant, really important. We need to get ethnic studies into every single classroom, and it does not necessarily just need to be in social studies classrooms. We need to get ethnic studies across the board, integrated in all subjects. And as a supervisor of teacher education, really recognizing the critical role I have and the responsibility I have to ensure and kind of help develop teachers, new and beginning teachers in the Inland Empire, to really focus in on, them digging into their own, understanding of their families, understanding of their history, understanding, recognizing where they are, what land they're on, honoring that deeply, and really moving towards, what's going on in your community, globally, not just, locally, but globally. What's happening, right? How is that impacting your community? And recognizing that you have the power to make some change, even if it is smaller in your eyes in the classroom, it's going to have a bigger effect. So I think that for me, really explaining the reasons why solidarity is necessary, giving historical background to folks as a supervisor, as a mom, and also as an instructor of ethnic studies, I think really peeling the onion is what I like to say. Peel the onion until you cry, recognizing that you must, and I think I read that somewhere, it's not mine, but really recognizing who you are, where you are, what you believe is really going to make change.
I think there's honestly still a lot of educational segregation going on. I subbed for alternative education in this past year before I entered the teacher program, and there's a huge ethnic disparity between the kids you see in alternative education schools. And I heard people in education speak about it as a stopping point to juvenile hall, which is very unfortunate to view kids already on this kind of school to prison pipeline. So I think that's something that we should really be addressing to make sure we're not systemically like excluding certain people from certain pathways and like funneling them into like places of harm. It takes an openness to learn. That's the most important thing I would say. And then also being willing to call out things that are like unjust and not being like scared or just focused on like your own self or your own like achievement, but really thinking about how will this impact like my whole community.
I always felt out of place in the education system only because I grew up in Mexico. So I felt definitely out of place. There I had a language barrier, and I didn't have teachers who were bilingual. It was predominantly white, although I was still part of the LAUSD system. Some of the teachers were Spanish speaking, but it was never really like an asset. It was more of like you need to speak English in the school, and then all the curriculum was in English. So to me, with social leadership, it's always like the population that you work with, right? You need to understand your students, you need to see your students, listen to their stories. And that's something that I've always been, even growing now, because I'm now as a professional, not a student anymore, but it's just more of like, how can I support students now, especially our EL newcomer students, on a personal level where we're understanding their needs and how the school can fulfill those needs. Just even seeing these schools the students that I work with, the schools that I work with, I feel like there's still a lot of discrepancies. There's still a lot of not a support. I know it goes back to funding, but students, there's a lot of gaps. And although we have great resources and everything, there's still a lot of students who are not being served.
You know, social justice leadership to me means that I am capable of making change. There's so many injustices that happen throughout our world and in our country. You know, when I think about America in particular, one of our issue areas that we advocate for is abolition and is trying to reimagine the incarceration system. The African American population only accounts for about 14% of the population of this nation, but yet we almost account for 50% of those that are incarcerated, right? That's a huge injustice, right? As well as trying to combat these myths that you often see spread throughout our community, the not present Black fathers. But if you look at reference the latest census numbers, 70% of Black men are present in their children's life in comparison to their white counterparts, where it's only 60% and 45% compared to their Hispanic counterparts, right? So it's, as a social justice leader, it's an opportunity to bring truth to the reality that we live in, that there's injustices, there's myths, there's negative stereotypes that are being perpetuated by all cultures. And this country was built off of immigration, right? Unless you're indigenous, right? There were people here, Columbus didn't discover anything, right? That lie, you know? So combating the lies with truth and knowing that in my heart, I believe that I'm doing something positive for humanity into the future, for those yet to come. You know, we were just coming from a presentation that was just orchestrated by a couple of professors at Moreno Valley College. The ethnic studies program that they're doing, that's enriching, that's helping people understand their culture, understanding their place and the opportunity that they have for change. But currently, when you step back and look at a nationwide lens with this current administration, with their attack on the educational system in general, but when you look at the efforts specifically focused on DEI, it seems to be a targeted erasure of all the ethnicities and cultures that help make America a beautiful place. Now, yes, there's much work that needs to be done here in this country, but I still do believe that America is still a land of opportunity, that, yeah, you know, especially as a person of color, you're going to have to fight a few extra battles, right? But if you're willing to work hard and do what you got to do, right, learn a skill, a vocational trade, or whatever the case may be, you can manifest that dream and vision that you've been given upon this land. So I still think it's a beautiful nation, a beautiful landscape with so many beautiful terrains. But what's most beautiful to me about America is the diversity and the beautiful people that call this place home.